Hi everyone, I'm going to make a start. I'm aware some people are still filtering in, but as we're past 6 o'clock now, I think if we kick off proceedings, that'll keep us to time. So good evening everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the second in our new Young Rail Professionals and Network Rail annual series, the Welcome to Rail Induction series. This is a new series which has been produced in collaboration with partners from across the industry. It's been designed to provide new and early career professionals with knowledge, key understanding of concepts, issues, challenges and opportunities facing UK rail, and as well as provide some great networking opportunities, which we'll be arranging in the new year with some face-to-face events for everyone that attended these online events. For those that were there, we had an excellent first session last week, looking at the history and future of UK rail. And today we're looking more forward, but also at the current state of affairs, with some of the most influential and inspirational leaders in rail at the moment joining us to share their wisdom as to what the challenges and opportunities the industry now faces, and importantly, what you as the next generation can do to meet these challenges, and also ask any burning questions you might have about your future in rail and what the industry will look like. So before I hand over to the other speakers, I just want to give a little housekeeping and say a few words about Young Rail Professionals in this programme. In terms of housekeeping, you can see us, but we can't see you. So if you have any problems with your audio or visual, please drop a note into the chat box and we'll try and deal with it as best as possible. And if you have questions, please put them in the question box on GoToWebinar. And for Nigel Harris, who's going to be fielding those questions for you later, please keep them brief and to the point, which makes it much easier for him to control them. Jacob, next slide, please. So my name is Paul Case. I'm the Head of Initiatives for Young Rail Professionals this year and formerly National Chairman. I've stepped in to assist during the interesting past 6 months we've had. In my day job, I'm a project manager at CPC Project Services. Working with me for Young Rail Professionals to deliver this programme is Jacob Cooper. He's a networking development manager at Network Rail, at Young Rail Professionals, and a programme manager at Network Rail. And Isabella Lawson, who is Rail Week manager at Young Rail Professionals and a policy executive at the Railway Industry Association. Next slide, please, Jacob. So for those who aren't aware of the organisation or familiar with Young Rail Professionals, we're a not-for-profit body and a professional network that's entirely volunteer-led. We have about 80 volunteers across the UK running our organisation. We're free to join with over 5,500 members across the UK and internationally. We're CPD accredited, and it's worth noting that this event does count towards CPD. You'll receive a note from GoToWebinar afterwards, which you can use. And the organisation was founded in 2009. Next slide, please, Jacob. Thanks. So Young Rail Professionals' mission is to promote the rail industry as a fantastic place to work and celebrate the achievements of young professionals working within it. We work to inspire people to join the rail industry and do the best they can within their careers. And we put on lots of events and opportunities to help people develop their careers, such as the one tonight. Our values are that we're fully inclusive and we embrace everyone's contribution to the organisation and to the industry. We're collaborative, committed, we try to lead by example, and for the most part, we try to be fun. Next, please, Jacob. Talk a little bit about our initiatives, which I currently lead for Young Rail Professionals. So we run Rail Week, which took place earlier this month, which is a week of events designed to promote the industry and encourage young people to pursue careers in rail. We have a Young Rail Tours programme, which organises development tours domestically and overseas. For example, we went to Japan last year, and as a little plug, we're running an event in November this year for 3 nights in the Isle of Wight. We run a Heritage Rail programme, which works closely with our heritage railways, particularly the Festiniog in Wales, to run working weekends where we go and perform tasks such as track renewals, etc., and enjoy weekends exploring the heritage of our railways. We run our annual dinner and awards, which takes place in April each year. And we run an Into Rail programme, which is designed and run to promote the industry to schools, colleges and universities, and assist in career events and run events that encourage and promote the industry as a career. Next slide, please, Jacob. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Erica Diaz, who's a talent consultant at Network Rail, to talk a little about their contribution to this program and the organisation. Thanks, Erica.
Thanks, Paul, and hi everyone. I'm Erica Diaz. I'm a talent consultant at Network Rail. We're very excited to have been working for the past 6 months with YRP on creating this amazing Welcome to Rail induction program. For people that are new to the great industry that we are joining this program, it's a great thing to do. You can learn lots of things from our industry leaders and experts in the industry, build a personal network of contacts far wider than just where you are at work, and best to create your group, support your career and moving forward in the industry. Joining an organization can be daunting, and the rail industry is not an exception. I joined Network Rail 4.5 years ago, so I know how it's difficult to simply understand the grips of how everything works and come together. There are many organizations who work together across the industry to keep service running safely for our passengers and freight users. So the more you learn, the better equipped you will be to evolve your own career and play part in connecting and collaborating to shape and drive our industry. I'm personally very, very excited for you to join us today in the session and for the rest of the program. So I really, really hope you enjoy it.
Perfect. Thank you, Erica. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just going through the schedule. So like we said last week, we held our first session, which was the history and future of UK rail. And that was really well received. And today we're here with a number of senior leaders to offer you an opportunity for some Q&A. Then moving forward, we're going to be touching on the life of a train, so an introduction to rolling stock and infrastructure. So that will be on the 27th of October. We then have a Network Rail hosted event, which is called Staying on Track. So an introduction to track and infrastructure, so different disciplines from across the rail infrastructure. And then moving on into an introduction into signalling and control on the 10th of November. We'll then on the 17th of November look at HS2, so a case study into a railway mega project. And then finally, we'll finish off with modern innovations in UK rail on the 24th of November. So a really interesting event schedule coming up as part of this Welcome to Rail induction program, and we hope you really enjoy it. Just to let everyone know, all of the sessions are recorded, so you'll receive an email following the sessions with a link to the YRP YouTube channel in which those sessions will be uploaded, or those recordings will be uploaded. Probably just wait a couple of days just whilst we download the material and then upload it, but hopefully then you can access that as many times as you want. And just really a reminder throughout this to ask questions that you want answering with this event, but please keep them brief so that we can get through as many questions as we want, and it's just quite difficult to really filter out quite lengthy questions. So the briefer you keep them, the more chance you'll get of your question being asked. So I won't take up any more time, but I'll pass over to Nigel Harris, who's going to be really the host of this session. And Nigel, I'll pass over to you and let you do the introductions. 2 seconds, Nigel. I think you are on mute. Sorry, there we go. You should be unmuted now.
We're there now. I was actually speaking, but not saying anything to confuse you all. Welcome. Glad you're all along. I understand there's a few hundred of you out there that we can't see. And I hope you enjoy this evening. We've got some great panelists who are going to tell you about their experiences, and they will answer the questions. So the panelists we've got at the top of the heap, or we've got Andrew Haynes is at the top of the heap at Network Rail, the chief exec. Andrew's got a long history in railways, in operations, and now in infrastructure, and led the Civil Aviation Authority for quite a long time as well. So that was all great experience before he came back to the railway. We've got Dyan Crowther, who we can't actually see, I don't think, as yet, having a few problems with our webcam. Dyan is chief executive of High Speed 1, based at St Pancras there, running our internal high-speed railway. long experience in railways. I first knew Dyan, I think, back in rail track days in the early part of the 12th century, so she's got loads of experience. Slightly newer to the railway, but no less experienced in the business world as that. They've got Jacqueline Starr, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Railway Delivery Group. As Jacob said, I'm Nigel Harris. I edit Rail Magazine. Incredibly, I've done that since 1995, so 26 years and counting. I can't possibly be that old, but it would seem that I am. Still 37 up here, of course. Been privileged to have a ringside view of the entire privatisation period, from the very first private top, which was South West Trains in the days when franchises were on two sides of a sheet of A4 paper, before they got really complicated. And I've just been jotting down here, I think Andrew is my 8th Chief Executive of Rail Track. Oh, there's Andrew popped up. Andrew is my 8th, I think, Chief Executive of Network Rail, which is good stuff. Paul asked if I'd pass a few comments before we got going on what I see as the state of the industry at the moment. Well, I suppose the thing is to limit myself to at least 3 hours before I let the other speakers in. But we are at a real watershed moment. There has been no greater moment of importance than we face at the moment for a whole range of reasons. The Shapps-Williams report is fundamental that we get this right. And in my entire time on the railway, I've never known a time of greater consensus amongst the rail industry about what needs to be done. It doesn't matter what part of the industry you look at, whether it's Roscoe's, TOCs, infrastructure, contractors. Everybody seems to agree that we need a body between the government and the railway to take the government policy and turn it into an effective railway. This has sometimes been described as a guiding mind. I don't agree with that, and I noticed that Keith Williams didn't either. Keith said that the government has got to be the guiding mind because it has got to decide what sort of railway it wants. And GBR will be an operating mind, I suppose, which will take that policy of what kind of railway it wants and, crucially, what sort of bag of money there is to pay for it, and then use its combined expertise to get the best value out of all that. I fear that the Treasury and the DfT may yet not be quite as enthusiastic to give up authority and control as they claim to have been, and that will remain to be seen. And I think we need to make sure that everybody keeps pushing for a better railway in that respect, which means an independent action to actually deliver a railway from specialists. The example I've used frequently is the vaccines task force, where the government was savvy enough to appoint Kate Bingham, an able leader, and a budget, and she recruited a team, and the government stepped back and she did the job, and what a job. So that principle applied to GBR would be really good. We've also had the comeback from, I won't say post-pandemic because it doesn't look like we're out of it anyway soon, but rebuilding the railway from the wreckage of 95% passenger loss is a huge ask. The Rail Recovery Group, being led by Suzanne Donnelly, did one of our webinars, and Suzanne put her finger on something that we've commented on quite a few times, that we've now got, certainly for the moment, a leisure-led railway. The commuter railway was already in decline before the virus pandemic, and I don't see that coming back anytime soon. The big challenge for the railway, and I'll be interested in Jackie's views on this when we get around to questions or comments, is the very different way in which the train operating community is going to have to treat leisure passengers. We no longer need to jam in as many people as possible to accommodate 6% growth. They need to be treated decently like real customers, and they need a decent experience. So we need to look at train interiors, in my view. So I think we need a real mindset shift. So there are plenty of challenges. So I think we ought to get on with that sort of my kind of take on the overall state of where we are, and of course lots more freight which really proved itself during the pandemic. And every 70 containers, of course, only needs a single driver, which is a big advantage if we can crack the onward distribution issues. So I see that Andrew has disappeared again, Paul.
Andrew is resolving some audio issues, so I think if we can hand over to Dyan or Jacqueline to start in the background.
Why don't we start with with the panelists we can actually see, which is you, Jacqueline. If you'd like to kick off, and then we'll come to either Dyan or Andrew. So over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Nigel. Hi, everyone. I'm Jack, and nice to virtually meet you all. It'd be great to see you all, but I'll imagine you there in the background. And thanks for inviting me to be with you today. One of the things that the Williams-Shapps plan for rail seeks to do is simplify the rail system. So I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about RDG, the opportunities and challenges my own organisation is navigating to meet the ambitions we share with the government for recovery and reform. And I also thought it would be helpful to tell you a bit about me and the lens through which I view the industry and what I believe is vital to our long-term success as a sector. So about RDG, the Rail Delivery Group is the trade body for passenger and freight operators, Network Rail and HS2. And we do all the things that you would expect a traditional trade body to do. We develop policy, advocate for membership, share best practice, reputation building, etc. Where we differ is that we also provide core services that keep the railway running. So if you've ever interacted with the railway, use national rail inquiries, searched a journey on an app, bought a ticket, owned a rail card, reserved a seat, checked a departure board, a station, and that's us. We support and run the architecture behind all those facilities, as well as being responsible for ensuring that your fare goes to the right train operator. And so as we look to recovery, I'm actually pretty optimistic about the future of rail, and you might expect me to say that, but I honestly am. We, like lots of sectors, face a huge challenge in the wake of the pandemic. But as Nigel said, we also have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reform the sector for the benefit of customers and taxpayers. It won't be easy because I believe we have to reimagine some of our offerings, particularly around retail. We have to build dynamism and flexibility into the system. And we absolutely must challenge the established thinking and ourselves to do better, much better. And I include myself in that. I like to describe myself as having a relentless focus on the customer and remembering why we're all here. My background actually is in telecoms and banking, where I've honed my obsession for delivering better customer outcomes and developed a passion to improve customer experience. And when I joined the rail industry just over 6 years ago now, customer experience in many parts was considered that shiny new thing that other companies are focusing on over there. And I remember very early slide decks which sought to describe what is CX, and that was the big question. I'd like to think that we've matured a lot since then, and so many in the railway are also passionate now about improving customer experience, and they're aware of the role that we as an industry play in people's lives, because rail isn't just about the journey. I think that's probably where we've gone wrong in the past in terms of thinking that the experience is just the journey. You know, every day the railway connects people with opportunities, with jobs, prospective clients, businesses, friends, loved ones, you know, carrying goods to supermarkets, shelves, fuel to power stations, etc., etc. And you may have seen recently our Let's Get Back on Track campaign this summer, which was the biggest national marketing campaign for rail in a generation. And it encapsulates the power of rail's role in people's lives. If you haven't seen it, or some of the ads and the billboards at stations, then have a look, because it's just amazing to see the role that rail plays in people's lives. And the campaign itself was developed to put rail back on the map and to clearly show the role that rail plays in our lives. And so what does the market look like at the moment then? Nigel touched on, you know, return, and so what are customer levels like? Are they coming back? Well, in truth, it's a bit of a mixed bag at the moment. On average, volumes that are around 65% of pre-pandemic levels. And even before March 2020, though we had identified shifts in travel patterns. So for example, fewer people were traveling on Monday and Friday peak times. And our analysis for the smart card scans that people use to travel show that pre-pandemic, Mondays and Fridays were on average at 2 percentage points lower in demand than Tuesday to Thursday. We did start to see a shift in that trend. And as we look to recovery, some businesses are mandating people back to offices, others aren't. You may have seen in the news this week, I think it was Amazon that have said they're going to allow indefinite remote working. And so this isn't a uniform recovery. There's nothing about the pandemic that has been predictable. And whilst I personally think there's huge value in face-to-face collaboration, I also believe that flexibility is key to driving better customer outcomes. And we've seen part-time working and self-employment increase by over 1/3 since the start of this century. And we've recorded a corresponding fall in our season ticket journeys over the past decade, which is interesting. So 2009, 2010, season tickets represented about 45% of journeys. By 2019, 2020, they fall into just under 1/3. So the pandemic has catalyzed the shift to working from home, but the trend was already there. More people want to travel with greater flexibility. They want to reflect the new realities of work. And it's not unreasonable to assume that the post-pandemic period will see an increase in this customer demand for flexibility. So as you'd expect, the industry is looking at ways to meet this expectation and working with the government and the department to do so. The flexible season ticket that launched earlier this year is a good first step, but we have to be honest with ourselves that we're behind the curve and we must work at pace to catch up. We've also seen in the business market, there's some pent-up demand for business travel. So those who want to see clients and suppliers face-to-face, but there will clearly also be many businesses with an eye on efficiency, with a video conference avoiding the costs, both in time and cash, of half a day's travel in some cases. So we will need to work to entice these customers back. Leisure travel, again, as Nigel said, returning strongly and in some cases up on pre-pandemic levels, as are freight volumes, and the current HGV driver shortage follows how rail freight is crucial in transporting the goods and keeping supermarket shelves stocked. So whatever the shifts in the use of the railway for work, leisure or freight, RDG's members and I want to see a railway that reflects the realities of today and tomorrow and the actual journeys that people want to make, no matter how irregular and complex these are. And economically, it matters that we get customers back and attract new ones. Customer revenues fell to as low as 4% at the height of the pandemic. There has and there continues to be a significant investment in the rail network, and we must work to once again cover the day-to-day running costs of the railway. There is a wider economic need to attract people back. So research we recently commissioned showed that the total spending associated with rail travel was around 133 billion per year pre-pandemic. That doesn't include rail fares. So that's all the coffees and the goods that we're all buying with traveling and commuting. So there's a real economic benefit to encouraging that travel for rail. And we shouldn't forget the role that rail's playing in support of net zero targets. So as a nation, we have ambitious net zero targets, and in order to meet them, we must avoid a car-led recovery, and rail must play its part. A switch of 20% of rail usage to car gets Great Britain across Great Britain could result in an extra 1 million tonnes of CO2 emissions per year and 300 million hours of lost time due to increased congestion. And we know that more than half people are concerned about the environmental impacts and a long-term drop in rail usage. Some of our customers even telling us that they would prefer incentives around achieving net zero to be coupled with their travel rather than things like loyalty schemes. So that's why we have to seize the opportunity of reform and simplification as a key part of it. And RDG and its members welcome the William Shatz plan for rail and its recommendations and stand ready to support and bring to life the ambitions that are set within it. So we have to harness the expertise we have in the railway, commercial ingenuity and innovation that exists within the market. We have to welcome new entrants and establish the right balance of interactions between operators and customers. Central to our ability to do that will be Great British Railways itself, the guiding mind of the railway. It must be just that, a guiding mind, not a controlling mind, and that's an important nuance. We must get the relationship between GBR operators and in turn the customer right, and entrench a culture of flexibility, innovation and responsiveness that was simply not possible under some of the tightly specified franchises that were previously in place. We have to continue to accelerate the journey to reform our retail offer, get on with the rollout of things like pay as you go, refine our products and demystify the fare system once and for all, so that customers know that they are getting the best value for money. And these are fundamentals which will determine whether rail can compete with other modes. Let me just talk a little bit about contracts. I mentioned tightly specified franchises. So franchising had reached the end of its relevance even before the pandemic. It's worth remembering that following privatization, the innovation and commercial mindset of the private sector really helped to double passenger numbers and grow revenue. And it turned a £2 billion annual operating loss into an annual profit. But franchises had become so over-specified and tight, accountability is so blurred, that we failed in some cases to deliver what was expected of us as an industry. So we're grateful, the rail industry is grateful that part of the government's strategy to keep the economy moving during the pandemic was the implementation of emergency contracts, replacing the franchise system, so EMAs and IRMAs as they were called. And this really allowed us to keep functioning and for train operators to focus on their core operations, doing the things that we need to get vital goods up and down the country. And they will continue to develop, transferring across to national rail contracts and the start of passenger service contracts. And I believe that the department have released the notice for the first of those new contracts this week. Of course, the railway can't perform without its people. We're really lucky in that the railway is full of brilliant people performing a plethora of jobs, which is really vital. And we need to ensure that they continue to deliver a great place of work, a place full of opportunity and rewarding careers. And whilst there's been marked improvement, even in my short time in the industry, we have to strive to develop a workforce as diverse as our customer base. And that's diversity of thoughts, experience and approach, and what can lead to be the best outcomes. We also have to make sure that we attract the best talent and respond to the challenges and use our people to do that. In terms of the future of RDG, what does reform mean for RDG? So when responding to initial Williams call for evidence, we were clear that for reform to work, you needed to start with a clean slate. And so we fully anticipated implications for ourselves as an organisation, and the back office functions to keep the railway running, which are performed within RDG. It will transfer across to GBRTT initially, and we're working closely with Andrew and his team to make this happen early spring. So we can't, it's important that we don't become preoccupied with ourselves in terms of that reorganisation. It's time consuming and it's important, but now is the opportunity and the chance to re-engage with our customers, and we have to get on with the day job and support the transformation concurrently. We will be judged on the here and now, and getting the structures right is hugely important, but we have to lift our heads and think about outcomes rather than processes, and obsessively prioritise our customers in all of our decision making. Thank you.
Okay, am I muted? I don't think so. Thanks, Jack. I was scribbling away. We haven't got any questions from the audience yet, but I've certainly got a few, which we can go to later on. And yet again, lots of consensus. All the issues that you're raising as important there, we've been talking about endlessly in the magazine as well. So it's good to have that consensus, and I do hope that GBR will be given the flexibility, opportunity and the budget to approach those things properly. Now I can see Andrew Haynes. Can we hear him?
Can you hear me now?
Ah. Andrew, we've got the string tight on those digital cocoa tins that we're
I know.
I'm beginning to understand what people like Hugh Edwards mean when they talk about the adrenaline of live TV, wondering if something's going to happen when it's going out. So you're very welcome, Andrew. Good to see you.
Good.
Can we go to you then? Jack filled in there while we sorted out the tech
Yeah, I
issue.
heard Jack. I was there. I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me, so I could hear all of that.
Right, so
And
you're
actually,
aware of what she said. She set the scene brilliantly on all the issues that we're all talking about. So without further ado, Andrew Haynes, your 15 minutes in this webinar has arrived.
well, thank you. Actually, coming after Jack, I mean, I've literally, well, no, I've metaphorically ripped up my script because Jack has kept so much of the material. So I'm not going to insult you or bore you rigid by repeating so much of that stuff. So I will, I'll give us 10 minutes back and talk to you about why my vision for Great British Railways has a single word at its at its heart, and we can talk about that maybe. And that single word is simpler. Now, you may say that sounds hopelessly unambitious for a once in a generation change to Britain's railways, but I think that making the railways simpler could have a profound impact on our customers, on the way we transact as an industry, and then ultimately on taxpayers. Let me start with customers in the first instance. When I talk to many stakeholders, I give them what I call the contactless test, and I say, do you use contactless on London Underground? If so, when was the last time you checked your bank statement or your credit card statement to establish whether or not they billed you correctly? And I would say at least 9 times out of 10, they say, I don't check it. I might glance at it, but I never scrutinize it and check it. Why? Because I trust the system to do the right thing. And then I say to them, well, if we were doing the same with on some mainline railways, how would you feel? And they said, no, of course I wouldn't trust, because I don't believe that there's transparency in ticketing. I don't believe there's transparency of choice. And I don't believe that the system could be relied upon to give me the best deal. And so that for me is one really powerful example of where simplicity, or rather a simpler, I shouldn't say simplicity, because simplicity is an overpromise, but a simpler system, both of fare structure and fundamentally of retailing, could be transformative about how many people feel about Britain's railways. And in doing so, I personally believe it's probably the single biggest thing we could do to grow our attractiveness to the system. There's too much research that shows that too many people who never encounter the railway actually are captured by the mythology of complexity. Don't believe they would know who to turn to when things go wrong, who are absolutely bemused by the 4, 5 or 6 different types of uniform on a single station, or even the 3 or 4 different types of information desks you have to go to. I will never forget being stood on Edinburgh Waverley Station 1 month into this job as Network Rail Chief Executive, and it was Storm Alma, I think it was, absolute chaos on the East Coast and West Coast main lines. You literally couldn't walk on the streets in Glasgow. Eventually made it to Edinburgh, and realizing that individual operators and individual information desks would shut at different times, and the carnage the customers encountered. I genuinely believe that if Great British Railways provides a simpler system, it will be the single biggest thing it could do to grow rail's attractiveness, particularly in the context that Jacqueline has really clearly articulated about the fact that we can no longer rely on the cash cows of commuting, and actually we have to fight for passengers. We have to fight to be the preferred choice that people want to use. The second reason why I believe that simpler ought to be at the heart of Great British Railways is to do with how we transact as a system. I've had a brilliant career in rail. I started as a holiday job as a left luggage clerk at Victoria Station, and I was fascinated by the innate complexity of the system. But what privatization did was it created many more layers of complexity, and for a long time those layers were justified by the value that was generated by them. If you want to get into the into the academic area, it's effectively about the extent to which the cost of the interfaces in a vertically separated entity is outweighed by the benefits that's driven by that vertical separation or segregation. But what Jackie articulated in terms of franchising and what we've seen in things like the May 18 timetable was that the cost of complexity is now outweighing the benefit that can be generated from it. So simple organizational changes go through many contracts. Individuals can obstruct change which is of significant consequence to the finances and the effective operating of the system. Many of you will have caught up with the issues around the East Coast Mainline timetable for May 2022, and the reality that nobody is in charge of creating a coherent timetable on a route which is one of, if not the most attractive in the country, and where there are multiple operators. The system is currently designed for that to be a free-for-all, and that creates absolute complexity. It creates real difficulties for any one operator to operate the system. For any economists on the call, then the tragedy that commons is writ large, where the impact of the last operator can be disproportionately negative on everyone else. And so, if you are serious about wanting to change Britain's railways for the better, you have to be serious about making the contracting matrix simpler. Nigel and I will both know and have high regard for Tom Windsor in many ways. He did lots of good things, but he had a blind faith in the power of contracts, and that time has now passed. So just as I'm passionate about simplicity being the key to unlocking customer growth, I absolutely believe it's the key as well to unlocking a more agile, flexible, can-do culture in Britain's railways that is needed for us to respond. And of course, we've seen a manifestation of that during the lockdown, because when contracts were put aside, what we realized was you can change the timetable 6-8 times a year. You can do it within a matter of weeks. But it did require those contractual rights and obligations to be set aside to make that happen. It wasn't that we didn't have enough competent trade planners. It wasn't the technology. We found out all the time it was the incentives, the behaviors, the restrictions which were placed on those. And that's really important, because that is not about bad behavior. It's about people responding rationally and commercially to the incentives that are set before them. And that's why simpler contracts are such a key part of the future end state. And that absolutely plays to Jacqueline's point about Great British Railways' ongoing role with the private sector. I absolutely do believe that if we try to tie the private sector up in endless knots of multiple and complex metrics, trying to measure every single output, then we really risk reinventing some of that complexity, albeit this time in a bilateral contract. That will not be winning as far as I'm concerned. The third area then where I think being simpler can be transformational is to do with the taxpayer and the fact that the cost of the interfaces, the cost of complexity, very often has created an unnecessary burden on the taxpayer. It's an interesting dynamic, and Jacqueline and I were both on a table at a dinner a couple of weeks back, where I pointed this out, that in an era where passenger volumes have more than doubled, the subsidy to the taxpayer has not dropped a penny. Now, some of that has been because we've invested in good quality network, and we should not be ashamed of any of that. But some of that money has been wasted because of the interface costs that we've superimposed. The delay to introducing new services that we impose because we're not joined up. The duplication of activity. And what we know about a post-pandemic railway is that money is going to be tighter. It would be wrong if it wasn't. It would be a travesty if the government didn't hold us to account for being more efficient. And I think, regardless of whether or not you agree with me on that, it's pretty much a dead cert. So why not? Give me the benefit of the doubt. But in that context, it does mean that we have to make every penny of public subsidy matter. And that's why, as part of the business case for the white paper, the Department for Transport has identified, with support for myself and others, at least £1.5 billion per annum of savings that can be made in the system through simplification. £1.5 billion of savings that can be made through simplification. They won't all be easy, they won't all fall into our lap, but we absolutely believe those are all realizable, tangible benefits. So those are the three reasons why I'm a very passionate believer in the William Shapps plan for rail. I believe they're all absolutely critical to the prosperity and survival and flourishing of Britain's railways. I think they are lenses through which you can look at almost every issue. Take the issue of, for example, sustainability and decarbonisation. We know that whilst rail has a very, very strong carbon footprint currently per mile travelled, we know that the downside of that means that government return on its investment for further decarbonisation is not as good on the railway generally as it is in other sectors. And so we have to fight for every penny for electrification and the introduction of new technology. We'll be fighting in a crowded territory. So our ability to be confident about delivery and our ability to deliver better value because of a simpler system are going to be fundamental to that element, just as much as they are to service quality and they are to a modern fares system. I'll just say a little bit about myself so you know my context. As I said, my railway career started as a left luggage clerk on a holiday job because I was, in fact, I was telling Jackie and the RDG team I was living literally around the corner from where they were speaking just last week. So I worked at Victoria Station, and what that did was give me a real taste for what the railways can be at their best, the challenges of running a complex system, and what the railways actually bring to individuals and the stimulation and the value of community that they create as well. And from that job, I did various frontline jobs. I worked at Westminster. I had the privilege actually of working for a short while with Sir David Amess, who of course is very heavily dominant in the news now, not closely, but alongside him on some legislation when he was relatively new to the House. I suppose he'd been there about 7 years then, and I was an absolute rookie. And I can absolutely confirm what others have said in the last few days about him being an absolute gentleman, as well as an effective politician. I then spent a couple of years actually working on privatisation. So my career has now gone absolutely full circle. I was involved in what was called the Privatisation Policy Unit of British Rail, which was set up after the 1992 John Major election victory. Some of you, I imagine, will not have been born then, but people often forget that actually, I think it was the highest popular vote, I think, by any governing party since the 1945. An interesting dynamic, albeit that because of our parliamentary system that didn't result in a particularly healthy majority for him. But that government absolutely made clear that privatisation was its remit, and the Treasury made clear the model they wish to see, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so heavily invested now in the current level of reform. I worked for Railtrack for 3 years after that, and then had a time of my life worked for South West Trains, where I became managing director, and I still say that's the best job I ever had. So I have no sort of, if anyone thinks because of my role in GBR transition that somehow I'm anti-operator, I can absolutely assure you that's not the case. If I'm anti-anything, it would be anti-old Network Rail. I've worked as I heard Nigel say when I came on, I've worked at the Civil Aviation Authority, so I see that regulation is a very, very poor substitute for effective competition. And I passionately believe in the role of competition in the railway, and I passionately believe in the role of the private sector in that regard. And the last thing I would say is I passionately believe in the future of Britain's railways. Our future is quite literally in your hands. We are going to be a people-intensive rail system for at least another generation. I've had an absolutely fantastic career that's been far more rewarding in every dimension than I ever thought when I joined, not really knowing what I was going to do. My tips to you guys would be to be very open-minded about what you do, to be prepared to listen to anyone you encounter and discern for yourself the nuggets of wisdom you can take from them, to be relentlessly hardworking, but ultimately to choose a pathway that brings you happiness. I've never, ever had time for people who sit in an organization moaning. And it's amazing how quickly people can do that. So if you're already finding yourself about that, be it in network rail, train operators, RDG, we even work for Rail Magazine, do something about it, guys. Because life is too precious to be in a job that makes you unhappy. Because I think if I were to say to people, what was it that distinguished me between, compared to some of my other colleagues, I would say an enormous amount of good luck, being in the right place at the right time, first and foremost. Secondly, a recognition that my ears are bigger than my brain. That might not be anatomically correct, but actually it's something I really try to stick to. And then thirdly, always doing work that I really find rewarding and fulfilling for myself as an individual, which means I never, ever begrudge then giving it 110%. Thank you to Jacob and Erica and Paul for the invitation, to Nigel for hosting, and for Jack and Dyan. What a great opportunity to actually be, on a panel with two women. It is woefully rare, as I too often find out, but it absolutely has to be a sign of the future. And two awesome women as well. So thank you.
Nigel, you're on mute again, I'm afraid.
So, right, here we are. Are we back? Good, thank you. Sorry about that. Hang on, I've got some other warnings now. Thank you for some wise words there, Andrew, and thank you for the defining comment there that some of the audience weren't born in 1992, so appreciate being made to feel about 150. But youth is youth a substitute for experience where you actually need both? But some very, very wise words there, and certainly about getting stuff done as well. I've always found sort of contact with railway people one of the most enjoyable and impressive parts of this job. And my take on it is that there's two kinds of people in the world, if you boil it right down. There's some who look at the world and say, well, why? And then there's others who look at it and say, well, why not? And the railway is very well filled with people who say, well, why not? Let's just do this when the system allows it to do it, which is why the initiative you're leading over the next couple of years is so very important. But we can come back to some of that stuff in the questions, which are now starting to come in. So thank you for that. Please keep your questions coming. They seem to be getting longer. Try and keep them shorter because I need time to actually read them, assimilate them and direct them to the right place. Bit of multitasking there. So let's move on. You won't be able to see her, I don't think, but somewhere lurking in the darkness, we've got Dyan. Are you there, Dyan?
I am definitely lurking, Nigel. So, and I noted Andrew called Jack and I awesome and you a dinosaur. So I think that's great.
Well, if indeed, I can live with that, I guess.
No problem at all. Brilliant.
So Dyan, Chief Executive Officer of High Speed One. Dyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. Delighted to be here tonight, and I'm very sorry that you can't see me. Jack and Andrew have covered an awful lot of ground. What I'm going to try and do is, just cover one or 2 points and sort of some highlights that you can kind of take away tonight. So the remit was, what are some of the challenges that are facing the industry at the moment? And I think the first one, and Andrew touched upon this a little, is it's too expensive. We are too expensive. We're thought to be too expensive. We're perceived to be too expensive, not just by government, by our customers, and indeed also by sort of, some members of our supply chain. So let's look at what sort of some of those areas are that drives, that cost. Andrew referred to becoming simpler. Huge numbers of interfaces within the sector, but there are other issues as well. So we employ an awful lot of people. Our wage bill increases at the cost of inflation. Inflation is rising. So that intuitively is going to kind of make us even more expensive moving forwards. Now, there are a number of options and solutions that we can kind of look at moving forwards. Clearly, Andrew mentioned duplication. I think the other opportunity is digitisation as well. But we need to do digitisation properly. Digitisation can quite often mean you need more headcount, not less headcount. And having been a traditional operator for the majority of my career, I've often been the recipient, of many schemes where my costs have gone up rather than gone down as promised, primarily because sort of system issues weren't thought about during the kind of the inception and development. I think the other area that makes us expensive is overly bureaucratic, lack of decision making, and I guess sometimes a little bit of a lack of leadership. The other thing I'm also going to sort of mention that kind of drives our cost within the industry is quite often decisions are made for political reasons, not economic or business case reasons. Now, the proposal to move over towards GBR, not necessarily a guide in mind, but a single body, again, gives us that opportunity to move away from political interference. That might be a naive thing for me to sort of say, but allows industry to make sensible decisions based on evidence and, to a certain extent, common sense as well. So cost, the expensiveness of the industry is one of the challenges moving forwards. There isn't one silver bullet, but I think there is a tremendous opportunity with one strategic lead body coming in to really start to address sort of some of those areas. Another challenge, and Andrew touched upon diversity, and to a certain extent, diversity or adopting more kind of diverse kind of workforces will certainly help us to address the increase in skills gap that we see in our industry. Some of you may have heard me speak at the Trailblazers event some weeks ago, and indeed I mentioned the figure of 34,000. So by 2025, NSAR, National Skills Academy for Rail, predict that there will be a shortage of 34,000 people in kind of specific skill jobs within our sector. Now, those people have to come from somewhere. By adopting, diverse policies for recruitment, employment, retention of the workforce, that's a significant step in the right direction, making sure that we have access to a wider talent pool rather than the often traditional talent pool that we've seen the rail sector pursue in the past. Now, there are some good examples where significant progress has been made. If you look at my own organisation, HS1, 70% of my executive team is female, 50% of my team are female, and over 60% come from ethnic backgrounds. Now, it does make a difference. It gives me access to good talent. It gives me access to sort of some bright young things, but we need to do that on a much, much bigger scale. HS1 is quite small, but it needs to be applied across the sector to enable us to be able to close that skills gap and enable ourselves to be able to tackle sort of the digital agenda that's fast coming down the pipeline and enable us to address sort of some of the cost issues that I mentioned earlier. Jack touched upon the loss of passenger volumes that we've had. What we're all doing is trying to drive passenger volumes from a near zero base, and passenger volumes where we're facing structural shift, structural change, and really polishing our crystal balls to try and understand what the future is going to look like. But actually, as leaders, we have to a certain extent, determine that future. We have to be quite audacious in our thinking. We really ought to be sort of saying, well, this is what the future is going to look like. This is the goal that we're going to go and try and achieve. There's been an awful lot of analysis on the impact of COVID. There's been an awful lot of analysis on structural change. Now is the time more than ever for the industry to start setting objectives. If you set objectives, You can then put your plans in place, your policies in place to enable those objectives to be achieved. And certainly I see the inception of GBR, and if not earlier, the opportunity to be able to do that, to move the industry out of some of the inertia that it's facing at the moment coming out of COVID. So we need a system approach. GBR gives us the opportunity to be able to bring together a number of interfaces, organisations, structures, incentives aligned, and as Andrew sort of said, simple. Having worked in the industry myself for 35 years, even I find it complicated, and I understand it probably better than others. So, how on earth do external stakeholders, customers, and members of the supply chain, cope with our complexity? So we need to be simple. I think the other area of opportunity and funding has been mentioned is, let's not forget private investment. Treasury are going to run out of money. As Andrew said, we are in competition with lots of other businesses. We have a big strategic spending review in play at the moment. There are not empty pockets, or there are not deep pockets within government. We are going to have to look elsewhere for investment. HS2 is an opportunity to be able to raise investment for the future. It could become another concession, much like HS1. HS1 was sold and raised, a significant amount of money for government at the time. There are other opportunities as well to bring investment into the sector. And I would urge the creation of GBR to sort of think about that in terms of how do we start to bring, other types of investment into the rail industry. But let's start with an open mind rather than it's far too difficult, we're never going to be able to do it. Andrew and Jack also mentioned sustainability, and now more than ever is the opportunity to leverage rail's green credentials, not just domestically, but internationally as well. So a little plug for High Speed 1 here. HS1 is the green gateway to Europe. We are the gateway to thousands of kilometres of a high-speed rail network. We're pretty much on our own. We don't get a huge amount of support from government. Eurostar certainly don't get any support. They're an open access operator. So everything that we do in terms of managing our cost base and driving up growth is very much, off of our own back. We've got some big macro factors and challenges at the moment. Brexit has given us a significant challenge in terms of how do we keep frictionless travel at borders. The problems haven't materialised yet because we've not had the volume of demand because of the pandemic, but that demand will come back and Eurostar are recovering. So we need to find a solution within the next 12 to 18 months to enable frictionless borders, and technology is part of that solution. Using our green credentials, and we saw pre-pandemic, people certainly internationally starting to choose rail over air. We need to leverage that. We need to start influencing government on, what is the cost of carbon? What is the cost of investment? What are the type of, KPIs that we need to start using from a transparency perspective that actually sort of starts that debate? And we need to achieve that modal shift, a modal shift to rail. And we want to get people to start thinking to choose rail and make a sustainable choice over how they go about their business. So a few things to think about, a few challenges, plenty of opportunities. Life is never going to be easy, but as Andrew sort of said, you're the future generation and the future leaders. Leadership is going to be very different for you guys in the future. You're going to need to be creative, you're going to need to be agile, and you're going to need to think hard about the type of environments you're creating for the people and teams that work for you moving forwards. Exciting times, and I wish you all the best in your future careers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Am I muted? No, I don't think I am. Not this time. Technology. Right. 3 fantastic presentations there. Lots of common issues, lots of commonality, lots of concerns. Where do we start? Andrew, your overall point cropped up about simplification, and Dyan picked it up. I wrote it down and underlined it and asterisked it and put exclamation marks all around it. I could not agree more. I don't think you said, what did you say? You thought people might think it's unambitious was the word you used. But surely everything else we've talked about that we either think needs doing or want doing is going to be turbocharged by simplicity. The bureaucracy is what causes a real problem, and so everything flows, as I see it, from simplicity. I can't give names to questions, but we have got some in because I haven't got the names with them. But give us some examples of the sort of simplification savings that can be made. Bear in mind, we've got a £2 billion hole in the accounts. Some's got to come from revenues, some's doubtless got to come from savings. So what sort of simplification have you got? What low-hanging fruit is there? So we can show we mean business. If you start, we'll ask Jack and Dyan.
Did you say you would ask Jack and Dyan first?
No, I said we'll start with you.
All right, fine. I heard
that.
Yeah, look, I mean, look, loads right the way from the fact that we've got, you know, we've got people who we've got loads of people who just manage contracts. You know, they're not necessary, through to we have office accommodation that we can't share, through to the way that we currently manage access on the railway means that we don't look at actually what makes sense from an economic perspective about the efficient level of access. We do it according to contractual entitlements and compensation, to duplication of certain types of services, because it's a more incentive, you know, because ORCATs incentivize you to run a particular type of service. I mean, there are literally hundreds of different ways that we can do that. And we've got, and there's some reasonably well developed plans in each of those areas, because we have to come up with a number as part of the Williams. The way a white paper has to go through government is you have to develop a business case. So they're not just fanciful numbers. You've actually got to identify, and the Treasury has to review whether or not they think it's credible that you can make those savings. So quite a lot of work has been done to capture them. They're not just a pipe dream by Peter Hendy, you know, in his bath smoking a cigar sort of thing.
Now there's an image that's going to be hard to shift from my head.
Messaging me on something else, which is why his name sprang to mind. Yeah.
Indeed. Look, let me just press you a bit more on that. I spoke at a Network Rail Speed conference this last few days, which was genuinely fascinating. Stuart Calvert, Steve Neighbour, and those teams there. And, you know, yeah, I am a skeptical, now I'm not going to say I'm cynical, but I've learned to be skeptical about claims of greater efficiency and all the rest of it, particularly in previous versions of Network Rail, where actually we weren't talking about more efficiency, we were just talking about cutting cost. We didn't necessarily boost efficiency at all. I mean, for the first time, even my skeptical approach sensed there's something really happening with speed, listening to those presenters, that they are managing to take on some of the real problems that's been within Network Rail on spending too much and not spending it efficiently. What sort of progress do you think you're making on that? And can they get it down through the permafrost? Clearly, the people who are running those programs are doing a good job, and we've seen Oakhampton and everything else. But that $2 billion, you're going to have to really motor, aren't you, to get some worthwhile efficiency savings and not just cost cutting? Yeah, well, it's worth saying that enhancement projects covered by speed are on top of the 1.5 billion. So that's on top of a gain. But look, let me give you an example of something which is deliberately quite controversial in the interest of stirring the pot a bit. You know, the costs of electrification at the moment are prohibitive to, you know, actually doing what the country needs us to do, which is to decarbonise our railway. And one of the things we've been looking at is whether or not actually we can safely reduce the amount in which we have to increase parapet heights for road over rail bridges. And we've done what we think was a good piece of work. It got rejected by an RSSB panel, which by the way is not an RSSB point. This is industry players
without anybody asking what the value was. Now, we reckon across the whole of the decarbonisation of the network, that was worth £750 million, £750 million worth of saving. And actually, it was rejected on a few hunches, because we've come to a point in the sector where we just absorb cost without really realising the consequence of that. I could give you loads of other examples of our own activity. A brilliant example I read yesterday, and this is one absolutely against Network Rail. We managed to save 25% of the cost of station improvements at Denmark Hill by getting GTR to doing them and simply Network Rail stepping out of the way. 25% reduction in the cost of delivering that simply by Network Rail getting out of the way and allowing the train operator, who at that time had a more agile approach to doing it. So I think we are genuinely making progress with speed, because what we're now able to do is to benchmark, and we say, if you can't meet those benchmarks, you will not get approval. End of. You can spend as much time as you like developing a scheme, but you will not get approval if you don't meet those benchmarks for outputs. Now those benchmarks have to be more sophisticated. Jacob on this call, I sat next to him at dinner. He's involved in TRU, which I told him at the time was probably a career limiting job, but never mind. It's a massive challenge. But the cost of electrifying across the Pennines is, of course, very much higher than it is on the borders line in Scotland. But if you have really clear benchmarking and you hold people to account, and I'm absolutely confident that we can significantly reduce the cost of some of these enhancements.
Yeah, there's
probably not a good thing, but I mean, it's one of my passions.
I mean, I first came across what has turned out to be speed was Rob McIntosh's King's Cross upgrade of a few years ago.
Yeah.
Not the uncrossed thing last year. And the thing that stuck in my mind, or fell into place for me, was when Rob explained that according to the rules, he had to take down that glass footbridge that's over the station because of parapet heights and electric wire. He said, but the minute I do that, it triggers costs of tens of millions of pounds up the bank. What we did, he said, was looked at that it's actually monitored most of the time. If you go and stand on that bridge, within 30 seconds, a Network Rail blue tabard appears and says, what are you doing? Can we help you? Are you lost or whatever? That interpretation of the rules, which a few years ago would not have happened because there would have been fears of having your head shot off or whatever, really career limiting. How much is that thinking starting to permeate through Network Rail? Because there's millions of pounds to be had from that, isn't there?
It's a cultural thing, so there will be areas which are still resistant, but I genuinely think it's beginning to come through now. Of course, a lot of projects are well in development, so it takes a while for us to see that through. And there are lots of people who are very passionate about their cost base, is worth saying as well. There are a lot of people who are very passionate about certain dimensions, but with the greatest of the respects to them, they don't have the whole picture. They can't take that view. I've been very heavily involved in creating a new system to value level crossing work, and we have been literally saving, in terms of the Ely area enhancements, multiple hundreds of millions of pounds by bringing a simple, straightforward business case approach to level crossings. It says, and this is really quite challenging conversations, even if it's about saving lives, it still has to make economic sense, because otherwise you'd be better off saving lives in a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's getting people to the point where they really understand that you have to value these things is so important.
Well, given that cultural change is the most difficult thing to achieve, I mean, I found that speed conference really quite exciting because there's a definite feel of it in the air. So good luck with that, and I hope it goes on. Jack, what about you? What's simplification? Big question for you, I realise. What low-hanging fruit is that operators can do that will simplify the railway, and obviously so, which we can show we mean business, and there's lots to be done and lots to be achieved, and here's a quick good start.
So I think there's two things. The first one, and some of you will be familiar with a piece of work that we conducted across the industry starting years back, actually, where we wanted to understand in reasonable detail what was every single transaction that a customer would experience. And we looked at this, and there were kind of 132 actually. I can strong word, but I can guarantee you that across the majority of those, there is significant duplication and unnecessary effort. And so many of those things could be done just once by the industry. And, as an example, all these interactions capture the moment that anyone would consider to start thinking traveling with us, to the point that they get off and they go and shout from the rooftops to the man next door or the woman next door. And everything that goes with that, the bits that they experience, the systems that allow that to happen, and all of the infrastructure that support it. And throughout that whole piece, we've kind of tinkered around the edges a bit, and we've grappled with various aspects. We've grappled with retail, Nigel. Dare I mention the complexity of fares, but it's an important part of it, and there's a strong thread throughout that whole experience. And if we were to only stand back, make a concerted effort across the industry to say, actually, what can we stop doing? What can we do better? What can we, what level of duplication can we take out? But also put pressure on ourselves to make it happen at pace. And that's the second thing I would offer. The time that it takes to deliver some of the major programs and the major changes within this industry is astounding. It's crazy. It can ask for a timeline associated with a small change, and we're talking years. And actually, a really good example. So in recent weeks, unsurprisingly, some of the people close to number 10 and politicians are banging the table a little bit to say, we want to see some of these changes coming through now. You've seen it in the white paper. We want them to come through. And so that filters down to pressure to local teams, particularly around customer information was the latest challenge. And there's a really comprehensive program to deliver some changes around that. But no, politicians want changes, and then we want these changes in 3 to 4 weeks. And the team can do it. They're going to make it happen. We will make changes in 3 to 4 weeks, but it takes that level of pressure. And a lot of that is just a behavioural change, but also there's a fear factor, back to my point around people needing to look up and understanding the outcomes that they're generating, rather than ingrained in the program level detail. So, long way of answering your question. 2 things. Look at that end-to-end interactions, decide what we can rip out, stop the duplication, make it more efficient, and time. Reduce the time significantly that it takes to deliver some of these things, because that comes at a huge cost across the industry.
Yeah, I agree with all that. We'll get on to ticketing and fares, but that's hardly a simple improvement we can make. I mean, before we just move on to Dyan, let me seize the opportunity to ride a personal hobby horse, which anybody who follows me on Twitter will be familiar with. Every time, and I do mean every time I go to Leeds, I am made to stand on a platform along with all the other passengers queued up at the door in the cold and the rain until a northern crew turn up in their own time or whatever the time and let you on at departure time. And I look up and down. These are customers, and we are not treating them well. People who have to travel, I guess, will travel and do it and accept it. Leisure travellers won't. They'll do that once, they won't do it again, and they'll tell all the friends, which negates that wonderful let's get back on track campaign. So there must be low-hanging fruit around the railway like that, which we could act on immediately, surely through RDG.
I agree with you, but it requires everyone to stand behind that level of change. And you know what it's like to bring all of the industry together. We've used what might sound like a derogatory term in support of operators around herding cats, but I'd say if they were in the room, it is like herding cats to get something done. Why? It's not because they don't understand that they need to deliver these things for the customer. It's not because they don't want to drive that change. It's because you can't get to a consensus in a sensible amount of time to actually make that change happen.
But surely you've got to start somewhere.
Yes.
And certainly Northern, the excuse I'm being given is, oh, it's security. We're not allowed to leave trains unlocked. Well, yeah, you are, because other TOCs do it. Other TOCs leave trains unlocked on platforms. Customers. I had 2 experiences of it at Edinburgh Waverley with LNER trains. I got onto LNER and they sorted it. But these things are low-hanging fruit, and somebody needs to get stuck in and make a start, in my view. But okay, Diane. Oh, sorry.
Nigel, just want to make a point, and actually I'm in danger of kind of sounding slightly hypocritical here, but the quickest way to make that happen is a diktat from above, because that's what works at the moment in this industry, is an instruction, and it gets acted on, and it gets acted on quickly.
But it's called management. I mean, I've been banging on about it on Twitter for months, couple of years, nothing changes. This is surely about management. And Northern, of course, is run by the taxpayer. It is a nationalised railway. But somebody needs to manage it, surely.
Yeah.
Okay. Diane, what's your recipe?
Okay, I've got 2. So performance regimes. Okay. Just drive complexity, drive adverse behavior, non-customer focused behavior, and they kind of drive cost. So addressing performance regimes and simplifying them and reconstructing them, I think, is a first. So because some of them can be fiendishly complicated, they certainly don't drive the right outcomes that are appropriate for the industry today. So simplification of performance regimes, or even eradication of performance regimes, dare I say. I think the other area that can be simplified is how we approach risk. We talk about risk a lot in the industry, and risk is often a reason for not doing something. We talk about risk in terms of how we price risk. We talk about reasons not to do something because of safety risk, etc., etc. I think we need a simple conversation about risk, understanding what the industry's risk appetite is, giving a framework to the companies that operate within the industry in terms of how they can make those type of risk-based decisions. Most organisations I've worked in during my career slavishly follow processes, booklets, guidelines on risk. And what I generally sort of say to them is, what's going to stop you delivering your business objectives? And they look at me and I sort of say, well, that's your risk. It's not a load of stuff that's written down in your books here. What's actually going to stop you doing stuff? And that's the way that you've got to think about risk. So simplifying risk, having a kind of a common narrative around that for the industry, I think would be imperative. So those are my 2 offerings, Mr. Harris.
And is the risk thing you've talked about, is it sort of, not to put too fine a point on it, arse covering?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're very good at identifying risks, and we're very good at pricing risks, but we're not very good at identifying risk uppers or opportunities. So, you know, we should all be in the spirit of you know, putting in place kind of risk-based business plans, and certainly you know, any business plan should have a list of risks and opportunities in it, and I'm sure we all have experience where the risks often outweigh the opportunities because people are too concerned to sort of sign up to an opportunity on the basis that it might not happen. So I think, you know, developing a different type of language around risk and how it's applied within the sector, I think would drive different behaviours, because risk is about, you know, preventing you from doing things. That's often how it's kind of perceived and presented, as opposed to being an enabler. Because I think if you can demonstrate that you're managing a risk or mitigating a risk, then, you know, from my perspective, that's good enough. Because if you want a risk-free kind of investment or working in a risk-free industry, don't work in the rail sector, because it's full of risk. It's how you respond to that and how you mitigate risk that is important.
Thank you. I can't see you, so I'm assuming you've drawn breath, and I'd jump in. The Chief Executive of Network Rail is waving. I think he's trying to catch the chairman's eye.
Yeah, I was just going to come in and endorse what, maybe elaborate a little bit on what Dan was just saying, the opportunity of a whole system risk. I've got some absolutely brilliant people in Network Rail who believe it's their job to make sure that there's no risk transferred to Network Rail, regardless of the cost to other people of that consequence. And in one sense, they're acting rationally currently, but they could be costing the whole system a great deal of money. And there are people in operators who likewise are currently almost legally obliged to protect their own risk without. So one of the big benefits, I believe, of actually putting revenue back together with infrastructure and in part of GBR is it allows us to take a whole P&L, a whole profit and loss view of what makes sense. And we shouldn't underestimate the power of that. Just to really sort of, affirm what Diana said.
Okay.
Because if one party takes a view of risk by themselves, then they either try and transfer a load of risks, or they defend themselves, and they don't look at the overall system.
Okay. Jack, are you still there? Have you got a view on risk? No. Oh, there she is.
I am still here. No, to support what's been said, Nigel.
Okay. Andrew, do we need to move away from weekend disruptive working given the shift towards leisure travel?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic because the shift towards leisure travel is not sufficient that there are more people traveling on the weekend than they travel on the weekdays. At the moment, weekdays are still busier than weekends. Will that remain the same? Don't know. I think the key issue is to look on a route by route basis. In the last couple of years, we've done far more work on blockades. You've seen some of them, particularly during lockdown on the West Coast Main Line. We've got another one being planned for January. You've seen quite a lot on Southern region. Most of them seem to be with B. We've had Borkum, Barnhurst and Barnham. Horsham doesn't quite fit into that, but I suppose at least it's Billingshurst on that line, isn't it? But the point. So what we're looking to do is to say, where does it make more? How does it make sense to do this piece of work in this territory? We had a massive 8-week blockade at Bristol, and most people's view is it was probably a bit too long. Actually, the system was quite fragile at the end of that. Unfortunately, it's like most of the things in the railway. It's not as binary as weekends are busy, so now we move work into the week. Because I said at the moment, you'd be moving work into a more disruptive area. But we've got to be, as Diane and Jack have said, we've just got to be much more agile about how we make those decisions. And it will vary route by route, location by location.
And is it about timing, Andrew? Is it a case of maybe it's some weekends, say bank holiday weekends, you have to take a different view of engineering?
Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of people talk about Christmas, but of course, the thing about Christmas is very, very few people want to travel on a Christmas day, and very few people want to travel on Boxing Day. So you've got 2 days already there. And so, as I say to people, it's the worst possible time to be doing, major infrastructure grades. We have to pay people, huge supplements. The weather is, quite often dreadful. The only reason we do it at Christmas time is to make use of the fact that railway is in any case going to be in sleepy mode. Now, does that change in the next couple of years? It may do. It'll certainly change, but what it will not be is uniform. So our response to it shouldn't be uniform. And that's why I'm a huge believer, as you know, in devolution and ensuring that those decisions are taken in areas where they really understand the impact on markets, freight flows, passenger flows, and the consequences of not doing the work. You can't manage that centrally in a network-wide basis, in my personal view. You require too much local knowledge to do that really well.
Okay, I want to get on to fares and ticketing and who the customers are and all that sort of thing in a minute. Just a quick one, Andrew. How do we ensure that the culture of GBR is different and it isn't just the same culture or multiple cultures? You've indicated, and Peter said it in just about every speech I've heard him give over the last 7-8 months, that he doesn't want the old network rail in GBR. So how are you going to ensure that
I don't want the old network rail culture and network rail, never mind in GBR. We are a function of an organization that's got a particular type of incentives, as we've just said. That's not to say that there aren't fantastic people in network rail, but they work to a context which is radically different. Look, we've got to do it by being open. We just today actually opened up a whole load of secondments in the Great British Railways transition team, right the way across the sector, to people who want to come and join us. If you look at the work we've been doing in the Rail Revenue Recovery Group, I think of 16 people there, only one of them is a network rail person. and that's somebody who used to work in the Wessex Alliance. So it's actually about bringing people of all skills in right at the outset and being very determined about it. One of the things that, if I'm honest, really annoys me a little bit is people say, well, the minute you walk to Network Rail, that you've suddenly forgotten all your past. You know, the finest years of my career, my best years, my most enjoyable years were working in train operating. And it's slightly offensive to hear that the minute you take the Network Rail shilling, you become some sort of automaton that only knows one way of doing things. You know, it's a bit of it's lazy thinking, but what it does do is reflect on this fact that we need to create a very, very can-do culture. And we will only do that by being open and bringing the best of everybody in, and people being prepared to do it. And as you said, Nigel, being the why nots. You know, why not give it a go?
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, fares, ticketing, Jack. I remember the last alleged fare and ticketing reform under the dear old ATOC, I think when George Muir was there, and effectively it was just a rebadging of all the existing fares. That convinced no one. I can't remember what you said in your presentation, but you qualified your comments about flexible seasons, which I hope was an acknowledgement that they're just smoke and mirrors in many ways. You know, passengers haven't been fooled by that. Or the Treasury are actually going to play ball in this, because to create winners, you have to create what they see as losers, and the politicians don't like them because losers vote. And that's a key reason why nothing has happened on fares on the entire time I've really been on rail, substantively. Full stop, discuss, as the old A-level questions used to say.
I guess let me just start on the point on flexes. I mean, I'm choosing my words. I don't want to come across as defensive. That there are some customers out there where flexis is a good product and they're benefiting from it. But I take the point, Nigel. It's a start. It's a tiny start, isn't it? It's nowhere near where I would want us to be as an industry in terms of reforming retailing. And so let me just come at it from a retailing perspective, because we saw in the white paper that there were ambitions around retailing, and that's fantastic. We want to have a really strong retailing capability across the industry, but with that you have to look underneath the bonnet and you have to fix the system, because otherwise it really will be smoke and mirrors, and you can't introduce a red hot, I'm going to say something else then, a red hot retailing capability without making sure that all of the wiring is addressed at the same time. And coming back to your point, Treasury, there hasn't been an appetite to address all of the wiring. There's been an appetite to change the carburetor or change the oil without the full overhaul that the system requires. And the expression of this, I live in North Somerset, south of Bristol, and I see people walking up the stairs and kind of stopping dead in their tracks because they're grappling with, what do I ask for? What is this service? How am I going to buy it? Bloody hell, it's expensive. All of those things. And actually that's what we should take, and that's what we should fix. And those are the outcomes that we want to influence in terms of the overhaul and the reform that we talk to. I think sometimes we're in danger of being too internalized around the language of the reform within fares and ticketing. Let's keep bringing it back to actually what the problem is for our customers, the problem around the complexity, introducing the simplicity that Andrew has talked to, but also going to need to be some longer term investment and commitment, because if we are to truly be successful in overhauling retail to the extent that we are advocating as part of the William Schaap's white paper, then that's going to cost money, not just to invest in the short term, but to keep it alive, to keep it relevant, keep it true to what emerging customer needs are going to be, and all the wiring underneath it. That's going to take a significant amount of investment, and there's going to need to be a very strong business case to convince Treasury that that should be done now.
Okay, and I think you had a cultural point you wanted to make.
I did, thank you. I just wanted to say, and Andrew, I've heard Andrew say this a number of times, on the cultural point, I think it's really important to emphasize that it's not GBR alone that are going to create this culture. It's everyone listening to this. It's, you know, it's me, it's you, it's Dyan. We all want it to be different, so we all have to recognize our point in contributing to that, because Andrew alone, with the greatest respect, cannot influence that cultural change.
Okay, Dyan, I think you had a point you wanted to make.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. I've got quite different views on kind of fares and ticketing. And there's some interesting things happening in Europe. So if you go to Luxembourg, for example, you don't have to pay to go on public transport. It's free. Now, maybe what we need to be doing as an industry is start looking at, you know, sort of some of the long-term sustainability goals around urbanisation, population growth, etc., and start sort of saying, well, what is a sustainable kind of decision around kind of fares and ticketing? How much does it actually cost to do all the revenue protection that we do? How much does it cost to put in ticket machines, sell tickets, all the marketing, etc.? Why don't we give it a go and actually sort of say in some of our principalities and cities, actually you can travel for nothing, and then just sort of see, you know, but that needs a policy change. And again, as Jack sort of said, we need to kind of start thinking about, well, you know, what is the business case for that? But I think we spend an awful lot of money doing revenue protection, yeah, for what purpose sometimes, and we spend an awful lot of money building infrastructure around revenue protection. And sometimes I just kind of think, well, what's the point? Why don't we just make it a free service? Because that then supports, you know, long-term economic growth, it supports sustainability, it's inclusive, and certainly I think at a time when we need to bring people back onto the railways, it might even attract people back onto the railways. So that's my rather kind of left field view of fares and ticketing, Nigel.
It's an interesting view, and the broader point about entrenched attitudes. I remember a few years ago, again, pre-RDG, where ATOP fought tooth and nail to stop Oyster being used on heavy rail around London on the basis that it would cause a reduction in traffic, and actually it increased business. So we do need to challenge those assumptions big time, I think. Just on your points about sustainability, we've got a question here. Somebody said, are we kidding ourselves if we think the vast majority of people will choose rail because it's sustainable rather than because it's affordable? And just as a side issue, Dyan, I loved your comment about Eurostar being or HS1 being the green gateway to Europe. I can see a TV ad in my head there with a green line going from London down to the Channel Coast and then branching out all over Europe. I mean, that could be very powerful, but that green gateway to Europe is really good. But, you know, sustainable affordability, surely we are kidding ourselves, as the questioner asks.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, why not?
So yeah, so we have to change. So how do we achieve that kind of modal shift so people do make, you know, a sustainable choice in terms of how they move around, you know, either visiting friends, family, commuting, or whatever. And I've been quite struck by sort of some of the initiatives that Lumo are challenging, are introducing, the new open access operator on the East Coast. So some of the things they're looking at is price. So, you know, a fixed fare, simple, you know, it's this fare to get you from London to Edinburgh. Excellent. Okay, I understand that. I'm not going to get fleeced. I'm not going to be charging, you know, something extra on the train. What they're also done is look at sort of some of the other barriers based on research. So Go Eat will deliver to the train. You know, they will also start looking at, you know, can we have luggage delivered to the train as well? So what are sort of some of the other barriers that actually stops people from making sustainable choices? And I think that's sort of certainly something that the industry needs to look at. And it's the first and last mile concept that certainly lots of kind of transport planners, generally urban planners, struggle with, you know, to be able to make, you know, public transport a more attractive choice for people to use.
Nigel,
Jack?
can I?
Yeah,
I just want to come in and offer an example. So I saw this a few weeks back at Paddington Station, and it was a young chap, looked like he was maybe traveling for uni, and he had about 6 bags with him, and bless him, they were kind of front, back, and by his side, so he couldn't control all of them, and he clearly didn't want to let them out of his sight. So what he was having to do was to shift them along 100 meters each time, run back and then move the others and move the others. And he did that about 5 or 6 times before he could board his train. Now, bless him for perseverance, to use train as his mode of transport. And I just offer it as an example. Wouldn't it be great to have a service for uni students and half-term time to say, actually, come on board with us, your luggage is taken care of in the form of X, because it serves as a big barrier. Because I've been on the motorway when the unis are going back and it's absolute logjam. We talk about sustainability. We've got to get those cars off the roads, and we've got to be creative about how we can do that.
There's a very big issue there that you've opened up about luggage in total. The last generation of mainline trains specified by the government were to jam as many people in as possible. And even when they're full of business people, there is not enough room for luggage, baggage, buggies, you name it. And that is going to be an enormous obstacle. And again, is it another one of those areas of low-hanging fruit for some of the operators and maybe the Roscoes to get together and trial the reintroduction of a luggage van type area? It's easy to take seats out on a practical basis. It's just like airline seats. You undo the nuts and bolts and slide them out.
Yeah.
That sort of luggage in advance thing as well. There's an awful lot of these things. What we're talking about here is reinvented traditional railway practices, which we threw away over the last 25 years for one reason or the other, largely to jam people in. Do we just need to step back? And how do we get the industry to understand who the customers actually are? How do we develop better customer centricity as a question I see? Because if you understand that, it will give you all sorts of solutions, whether it's locking people out of trains, making more luggage space available, putting more porters back on this platform. It would have helped your guy there. I wonder how many railway people maybe saw that lad struggling and didn't step forward to help. So what about the customer? Because I wrote, and you need to read Steph Foster's editorial in the current issue of Rail. She's written exactly about these sort of things, and it's really good, good reading. Andrew, I think you wanted to come in here.
Yeah, I'm a real saddo, and one of the proudest things I did when I was running South West Trains was the reformation of the Class 455 trains, and they're still in traffic now. I think last time I checked, they were the most reliable trains on Britain's railways. They're 1980s trains, but if you go in them, you absolutely wouldn't think it. And the reason I'm so proud of it is because we did it when I was running South West Trains with no franchise commitment, no contractual obligation whatsoever, but we found a way of making it make business sense. And we did a good deal with Porterbrook. And if you look at those trains, they're ultra flexible. Now, okay, there are fewer seats because they're suburban trains. But actually, we did that because we had that customer centricity and we found a way of making it work commercially with our partners. It didn't happen because somebody created a very detailed, narrow specification that said the carpets have to be green and there have to be exactly these seats with this pitch and this space between them. And so I do think that when we look at Great British Railways, we've got to find a way of allowing people to bring that value. We were doing that 15 years ago. You don't even have to go back 25 years because we had the incentives to make that happen then. So I think it's not by any means impossible to do that, but we have to get up. We have to detach ourselves from this addiction to specification, I think.
Don't we need to make it possible to do it, Andrew? You're talking about simplicity. Here's a really simple proposed solution. Before any board makes any decision anywhere on the railway, they say, who is this for? Who benefits? And if the answer is that not the passenger, do something else. And let me give you one huge example. LNER and East Coast are brilliant on diversionary routes. You very rarely have to get off an LNER train to get on a bus. Persistently, on the West Coast, we throw people out at Preston and put them on a bus for hours on end over Shap when there's a perfectly good railway we spent millions of pounds on for coal from Hunterston, which has gone. We've got Class 7 sitting around doing nothing. Surely that is in the operators and somebody else's interest, because it certainly isn't in the passenger interest. And if that mindset doesn't change, we are, to put it bluntly, stuffed, aren't we?
So I think you've got to have the mindset, and you've then got to enable people to do it. And look, the there are lots of reasons why it doesn't happen currently. Some of it is people are not incentivized to do it. A lot of the sort of flexibility we've been talking about, though, is that the Department for Transport believes, I think in good faith, that unless it specifies, it's open to enormous procurement challenge. And we've seen quite a lot of litigation in the field of contracting. And I don't know their legal advice, but we've got ourselves tied up in knots where we think that actually you have to specify too much. And I think in doing that, you completely disempower people. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really keen that we move on with reform soon now, because I think otherwise the current interim contracts, however well-intentioned they are, I think are going to be a pale imitation of a real long-term proposition to stimulate that right culture. And I know that might be quite controversial with some of my colleagues in the Department for Transport, but they are a sticking plaster. They are not the long-term solution.
Exactly. Quick answer from you, Andrew, and then I'll come to you, Jack, because I know you wanted to say something there. So, should all operating contracts require from an operator, concessionaire, whoever, that where there is a diversionary route, you will keep drivers' route knowledge up and will put passengers on buses as a last resort rather than a first resort now, because where a lot happens a lot of the time is because operators won't keep up drivers' route knowledge.
So I'm not sure about requiring it, because you've got to be very careful what you start requiring. But in my last job, I learned this phrase called the rebuttable presumption. And the point about a rebuttable presumption is you presume something's to be true, but you need a really darn good case if it's not true.
Well, I'll be happy with that.
And I think that's the way to do a lot of these things. You set an expectation, and there may well be times when it is so wrong for some certain diversion routes that it isn't true. But if you have a rebuttable presumption that people maintain it, it gives people the reasonable case to opt out, as opposed to it just doesn't make narrow sense to me.
Okay. Jack.
It's an important, it's a nuance, but it's quite an important one, because otherwise we get into this, you have to specify everything, and I only do, if you don't specify it, I don't do it, and that's the culture we must avoid, I think.
But we drifted into it. I remember Richard Bowker saying to me in 2002, if this particular operator will not clean his trains, I will make him. And that's when the franchise agreement started to become, much more restrictive. So there are, anyway, yeah. Jack, go on, you wanted to say something.
It was in response to your question about how do you instill customer centricity, and one important point from my perspective is all staff have to kind of enjoy what the railway offers, but they also have to feel the pain. And a trigger for me, I'm going to make a confession. A trigger for me is I had a conversation a couple of months back with a small group called Campaign for Family Friendly Trains. And these guys were talking about the trials and tribulations of young mums and dads trying to use the railway actually as the only mode of transport. But we were making it impossible, because how do they navigate with all of their gear? And yeah, I had an idea, but it doesn't really relate to me. My kids are growing up, and I don't have an abundance of luggage with me. So what I'm going to do next week is I'm taking my 1-year-old nephew up to London from Bristol, and I'm absolutely terrified because I've got no idea how I'm going to navigate the train with a buggy and a baby and all the luggage that goes with it. But I'm going to give it a go, because I have to experience this pain. Because that's what so many are going through, and for me that's a really important part of making sure that we understand what our customers are experiencing day to day.
I couldn't agree more, and you absolutely have to read Steph's editorial, which deals with exactly those issues. Look, we're supposed to finish in about 3 or 4 minutes, so look, it's a big question. It's a big double barrel question, really, so try and keep it tight for each of you. For each panelist, what's the single biggest risk to the success of GBR and its intentions, and are we on track for achieving GBR in the time we want to? Andrew, you should start with that, really.
Well, we're on track at the moment, but we're in the foothills. GBR will require legislation, and that could take 2-3 years. So for me, the big risk is the fact that we wait for GBR. So I think the question almost answers itself. The single biggest risk is that we somehow hang around waiting for GBR to sort things when it could well be 3 years away.
And there's loads of stuff you can do under the current legislation.
There's absolutely that. We have collectively, if the will is there from Network Rail, Department for Transport, the Treasury and operators, we could do a huge amount pending GBR. And why on earth would we wait when we've got a climate crisis that demands that we act? We've got a financial crisis, and we've got people in the system who are just desperate to do what they're good at.
Okay, thank you for that tight answer, Jack.
I'm going to have to be a bit boring and agree, actually, because for me the risk is that we see it as something that's going to happen in the future, as opposed to something that we can all influence now. Come off this call tomorrow, heads up, make this happen then. That's the biggest risk, in my opinion.
It's not boring at all, Jack. Consensus and agreement on what needs doing and that we need to just damn well get on and do it is actually good. Dyan, are you still there in the shadows?
I'm in the shadows. So it's a big risk to me, similar to what Andrew sort of said, is lack of cross-government support.
Right, good answer. Okay, look, I'm sorry we've got through quite a few questions, and some of them have been doubled up on themes. But I just thought we'll draw that to an end there, because I've got to hand back to the host. But Andrew made one comment during his speech which really resonated with me. We must not allow a car-led recovery to take root. I couldn't agree more, because I think it is happening. I know one swallow doesn't make a summer, but I regularly go to the northwest, my home part of the world, and because of the reasons I'm up there, it's not practical to go by train. I need a car up there, and so I drove fairly regularly. A1, M62, M61, M6, Preston, 2.5 hours thereabout. The last twice I've done it, it's been 5 hours each way, and there's no roadworks, no accidents. It was just sheer volume of traffic. And just a bit of anecdotal stuff, you ask around and people are saying the same. You look at the statistics for used car sales and the values of used cars, and there's clearly a problem there. The current infection rates for the virus are looking risky. They talk about maps again. The Prime Minister said this afternoon, winter's going to be challenging. It just all underlines that we need to do everything we can in my book to not just attract but retain people. And all the stuff you've said, Jack, and please read that editorial. I'd be interested to hear what you might think. Look, thanks to the panelists for a brilliant session. It's always a bit difficult doing it online, but I think we got through it. I think everybody got to say what they wanted to say. Thanks to all the questions, and they're still coming in. I wish we could do more, but we can't. I've enjoyed that. I always learn a lot when we do these things. Paul, back to you, wherever you are. There he is.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks, everyone. I'm actually going to let Jacob say the closing words. It's his turn this time. So, Jacob, you on?
Jacob, are you there?
He's only just asked me to do it, so I'm not sure it's too much my turn. But yeah, look, we just wanted to say from YRP and from Network Rail, just a huge thanks to all of you for attending. And this is kind of the conversations that the next generation of young professionals want to be really involved in, and I think to help us figure out as an industry how we get to where we actually want to be and what that looks like. And I think by having the next generation of professionals listening to all of this excellent conversation, they can understand the issues, they can understand the challenges, and they can help to solve it. So I guess thank you for giving up your evenings and coming on, both to the speakers but also to all of the audience as well. So a huge thank you from all of us for that. And then just a quick refresh of what we've got coming up next week. So next Wednesday, starting at 1700, we have an overview of an introduction to rolling stock and infrastructure. So that should be really good, especially if you're not familiar with all of the details of rolling stock. Be really informative. And yeah, that's everything from me. Over to the panelists, if they've got any last closing remarks. Nigel, yourself, or anyone else?
Well, look, I really enjoyed that. These things are always good. And look, if you want to do more of these things, I always find the cut and thrust of, I mean, not knowing what's coming quite interesting. So if you ever wanted to put further just general ones of these together with a group of panelists, I'm sure Jack would be up for it now and then, and a sort of a railways any questions could be quite fun. And look, just all credit to YRP. I remember the organisation being founded, and I think it's just great. Like Women in Rail, it's an organisation which has set itself up, which runs its own affairs, which is keen, capable, enthusiastic, determined, able, and it makes dinosaurs like me, as Dyan said. Thank you, Dyan, if you're still there. Knowing that the industry will be in good hands in the future, and if in the meantime I can find some use facilitating discussions amongst people who actually know what they're talking about, whose knowledge is deep rather than mine, which is this wide, that thin, then I'll be definitely up for that. So all credit to you, respect. You've got a great organisation which is doing a good job, which is why we recruited a bunch of you to be National Rail Awards judges. You're all doing a fantastic job, and the most important job is dragging the average age of the panel down. So there you go. That's from me.
Thank you.
Jack, have you got anything before you go?
Just a huge thank you. It's my absolute pleasure to do these, and yeah, if people take just one thing from anything that we or I have said, then that's a job well done. So my pleasure.
I can hear the wine calling from the fridge.
Just a note from me as well, we are going to be setting up an in-person networking event in February across all our regions for attendees and speakers at these events. It'd be wonderful to have as many of you there as possible, just to meet some of the attendees and for us to thank you for taking part.
Okay. Especially if there's wine.
Especially this one, certainly.
Do vol-au-vents, Do they still do vol-au-vents? Poor guys.
Brilliant. So I think that's probably it, unless anyone else has got anything. So a recording will be sent out in the next couple of days, so you can watch it back, you can pass it on to other people to cover key content, or you can refer back to it. And unless anyone's got any objections, I'll close the event there, and thank you again for everyone who attended.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jacob.
Bye.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.